it's been a long time since I wrote this. But yeah, along with my gratitude for you all being here and everything that's made it so that I'm here, I also just want to sort of express acknowledgement of the realities of all of the things that have happened sort of in history that have led us to this moment. We are sitting here on colonized land. I think it's safe to say, I don't know all of your histories and who you are, but I think it's relatively safe to say that by the fact that we are here, that we are well fed, we probably have shelter, we have love and support networks, we have some degree of financial security, and many people do not have that. And the fact that many of us have that as we're sitting here is dependent on the fact that other people don't. Our sort of security is built upon their insecurity. And that's the world that we live in. And it would feel wrong to use this moment only to celebrate and not to think on that as well. And I mention that because I was, are any of you familiar with Ursula K. Le Guin's short story, The Ones Who Walk from Omelas? Okay, so for those who are not, it's a very short story in which there's this kind of utopian society where everything is kind of perfect and lovely and glossy. And then you find out that it's all kind of dependent upon the suffering of a child, this kind of wretched creature. And I saw on social media maybe a couple of weeks ago, just on a tweet or an Instagram story, I don't know what, and someone said, I bet in Omelas people do child acknowledgements, kind of sort of making, sort of calling attention to the fact that, how common it is to do a land acknowledgement now these days, especially in Turtle Island and in places like Australia that have these colonial legacies. But what does it do actually which is not to say to stop doing these acknowledgements, but what are we doing? And I guess every time, I don't actually know the answer to that question. I don't know what to do. If you were hoping for that, sorry. But I think it feels right, at least, to call attention to the fact that everything that we do matters. And so every time I get up in front of people and I speak, I want to express that we have to do something. And what that is going to be like a process of discovery. But yeah, I wrote An Unkindness of Ghosts. I started writing An Unkindness of Ghosts 10 years ago. Sorry, is my volume, I see, are you? Okay, all right, okay. I started writing An Unkindness of Ghosts 10 years ago, and it was published 5.5 years ago. So it's been some time. And when I wrote it, it came out of a lot of the pain of being, a Black person, grew up partially in Texas, a violent place to grow up. Most places are in their own way. I think of reeling from a specific death in the news, and the fact that I can't even remember who it was, which, shooting, which murder it was, that really sort of made me think about the realities of the sort of the police state that we're under, is kind of testament to this. And I think sort of 10 years after writing this, and 5.5 years after it's published, the world doesn't look very different than it did when I wrote that. And in fact, in many ways, it's much worse. It feels like the power of the right has only grown. There's so many devastating political wins that they've had. And when I think about An Unkindness of Ghosts, it's very much about that pain of living in a world where we are so very powerless, and have we're sort of submerged in pain. And it comes at us every single day, all of the time. And maybe there's a future where it's going to be different that we can fight for. But honestly, the amount of control that we have over that is very limited. And while An Unkindness of Ghosts is a kind of dream of revolution, I really, really wanted it to be about the people there and what they make of life, living under this, because that's what we all have to kind of do every single day. Is we have to make a life out of these pieces that we're given. And that's where, for me, someone as a speculative writer, we get to make it up. We get to take pieces and make it up, and that we do that through art and storytelling and the way we love and who we get to love and choosing to love, and all of these things. So that's my little preamble. I'm going to read a little bit, and then I'll talk again. And I want you to sort of pay attention to that idea of sort of what do we make out of the pieces that we have, and how do we sort of live our lives under this, the reality of this. And I'm going to read, when I have been reading from this book and doing readings of it now for 5 years, I guess. I always read the same bit, which is the first chapter. My mom once, I was in doing a reading at a festival called the Calabash Festival in Jamaica. And my mom was like, I think you should read a different passage. It's kind of boring, the first chapter. And so I did, but I could really tell it like didn't go over well. And it felt wrong reading it. So I'm gonna go back to what I know and what I love, which is this first chapter, which I think it speaks so much to what the book is about. So yeah. Is it safe to say that most people in here have read at least a portion of the book? Yes. Okay. All right. Am I talking right now with an English accent? Yes. Okay. All right. I can't hear accents anymore, like as a result of like moving around so much. I don't. Okay. Sorry. I got to undo that. All right. Asta removed 2 scalpels from her medkit to soak in a solution of disinfectant. Her fingers trembled from the cold, and the tools slipped from her grasp, flopping ungracefully into the sanitizer. In 10 minutes' time, she'd be amputating a child's gangrenous foot. This shaking and carrying on would not do. Was this winter? Dim light, chemiluminescent reactions of peroxide, orange dye, and ester suffused the makeshift operating room. Star jars, the tea-deckers called their improvised lanterns. Astor wondered where they'd gotten the peroxide to work them, let alone the phenyl oxalate ester. All you got to do is give one of them a shake and the stuff inside gets all mixed up, said Flick. Rotted foot propped atop 2 stacked trunks. Look, you looking? Of course, Astor was looking. Couldn't Flick see her eyes? A pile of faded comics lay next to the child on a flipped over wicker basket, The Reign of Night Empress number 19 on top. Its cover depicted a woman named Miriam Santi in a beige trench coat carrying a cylindrical device made of metal and wood. When she pulled its tiny lever with her index finger, a silver ball shot out of the tube, wounding her enemy. Rifle, Astor whispered, her lips splitting at the corners where the cold had pasted them shut. As a child, she'd called them ripples for the way they had of changing everything in a story. And because she'd misread the word the first time around, finding that F's and P's looked similar to her untrained eyes. Issue 19 of Night Empress had been of one of Astor's favorites when she was a girl, and she'd read it along with every other Miriam Santi adventure available aboard Matilda. Old comics circulated wing to wing, deck to deck. Look how it blows up inside when I jostle it. Boom, 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 said Flick as they shook the star jar. Aster regretted the error. She was used to the style of her own deck where all children were referred to with feminine pronouns. Here it was they. She'd do well to remember. Explode, explode, Flick continued, tossing the star jar into the air before catching it. Except not really. If it was an explosion, there'd be fire, and if there was fire, it'd be hot. They spoke in that matter-of-fact tone native to children who believed they knew everything. My great-great-grandmama says there was blackouts before too, but they was just passing through. After 1 week, they stopped, and low-deckers never even had to have no energy rations to stop them. No cold, said Flick. Dark brown skin lit bronze under the meek glow of the star jars. If there was a chance he'd respond, and there wasn't, Aster would radio the surgeon. He'd write her a pass to transport Flick up to his clinic on G-Deck or somewhere else warm. He'd sign it in his looping cursive and stamp it with his fancy gold seal. Aster didn't know every guard on Matilda, but the one she did wouldn't dare deny a pass issued by heaven's hands made flesh. As it was, the surgeon hadn't spoken to Aster in 3.5 weeks, not since the start of the blackouts. No surgeon, no access to Matilda's upper decks, no upper deck access, no heat. It's like a star, see, Flick said, shaking another lantern, setting off its chemical show. Aster looked at the lantern, then at Flick, then at the lantern again. I'm afraid I don't. A star is a bunch of little things coming together to make light, yeah? Chemicals and all that. And our little special jars here is a bunch of little things coming together to make light too. Also chemicals, agree or disagree. Agree, said Aster, familiar with the basic chemistry from studies in astromatics. So they're the same. Chemicals plus more chemicals makes magic, Flick said, tongue sticking out. Aster admired the child's sureness, if not their utter wrongness. Your model lacks specificity and is therefore useless, she said, speaking more harshly than intended. This close to the end of the day, she lost the ability to modulate her naturally abrupt manner for the comfort of others. According to such a theory, a suitcase would be no different than a bomb. Sugars and synthase react to make the cotton of the luggage. Oxygen oxidizes gunpowder to make an explosion. Chemicals plus more chemicals makes magic describes both scenarios rather well. But of course, we know a suitcase is nothing like a bomb. Flick blinked obstinately, and Aster searched for a child-appropriate explanation. You're arguing that a person is identical to a dog because they've both got bones and blood. Guards be calling Tarlanders dogs all the time, Flick said, hand on hip. Aster twitched at the sound of the familiar word. She hadn't heard it in ages, but it still stirred a sense of belonging. Tarlanders were the inhabitants of PQRS and T-Dex, and it was as close to a nation as anything on Matilda. The guards are hardly a compass by which to measure right and wrong, said Aster. Flick's eyes flashed open in what was presumably mock shock. You're gonna get struck down for saying that, woman. Don't you know that Sovereign Nicolaus is the heaven's chosen ruler, and that the guards are Nicolaus's soldiers, and by extension, soldiers of the heavens? A spurn to them is a spurn to the heavens direct, Flick said in a high-pitched voice. Well, let's hope the heavens exact vengeance after I've amputated your foot. I wouldn't want you, righteous defender of the moral order that you are, negatively affected by my sacrilege. Without meaning to, Aster smiled. How about if you promise to do my surgery up good? I'll write a letter to the guard begging they spare you. I've been practicing my vocabulary and I already know what I'm going to say. Want to hear? Mischief drew Flick's face into a sly grin. Dear sirs, Flick began before loudly inhaling. On account of there being no heat down here, on account of there being no electricity, on account of the brand new energy ration so thoughtfully and nobly and honorably imposed on the steerage decks by Sovereign Nicolaus, on account of the blackouts, Aster fell prey to a brief fit of hypothermia-induced delirium and spoke out against you in her mattery. She's healed up now, so you don't have to worry about it happening again. Yours humbly, deferentially, meekly, and respectfully, Floor Flicker Samuels. Flick erupted in laughter and took a bow. Opinions? I'm just going to pause for a second to check in. Like, how is your endurance right now for listening? Yeah, should I keep going? Okay. You don't have to say that. You really don't. Okay, all right. Okay. Your sarcasm reveals clear disregard for the sanctity of the sovereign's guard, which I appreciate, Aster said, blowing into her cupped palms before vigorously rubbing them together. As much as she enjoyed the banter, their conversation proved a distraction against resolving the matter of the cold. You can have my mittens if you want, said Flick. They set down the star jar they'd been holding and showed off their wrapped hands. They'll warm you up so good so you can cut me up, no problem. Slice into me like a festival ham if you want. Aster's eyes made uncertain contact with Flick's. I cannot discern whether or not your offer is in earnest. It should be obvious I cannot perform an amputation in mittens. Are you joking again? Flick said, having the decency to look a little bashful about making fun. But they is warm, lined with rabbit fur. My great Mima skinned herself back when there was rabbits aboard Matilda. Real rabbits. When was the last time anybody saw one of those? Aster assumed the question was rhetorical, as she couldn't very well ascertain when the last time in the entirety of the universe someone had seen a rabbit. I didn't think the moments preceding an operation were particularly well suited to humor, but it's characterized a large portion of our interaction, she said. Aster was always memorizing new ways of being with people. Flick shrugged, the gesture causing the blanket wrapped about their shoulders to fall. I like to do the exact opposite of what's suited. We got a saying here in Tidewing. Should is for weaklings. Why would we care about such a thing when already nothing is how it should be on this cursed ship? Should won't make it so you don't got to cut off my foot, will it? It sure won't turn the heat back on or kill the man who thought to turn it off in the first place. Should disappeared 300 years ago when our old home went gone. There's no such thing as supposed to in space. Didn't your Mima never teach you that? Breaths glided like exorcised ghosts from Flick's mouth. Aster recognized the puffs for what they were, condensed molecules of H2O. But she reached out to touch one of the vagabond forms anyway. She imagined each foggy sheaf as an ancestor, even though the ancestors were dead, swallowed into the past alongside the great lifehouse from which Matilda had fled. My mother killed herself the day I was born, Aster said. Though it's possible she attempted to impart a distaste for should in me before passing, newborn infants lack the neural capacity to process language or form memories. So if she did, I don't recall. The way Flick pursed their lips, they looked on the verge of whistling. My great Mima says I'm always stirring up wounds. Forgive me, they said, eyes intent on Aster. Yet the wound of Loon Gray felt quite fresh and untended, no stirring from Flick required. Aster blamed the blackouts. The last time Matilda experienced ship-wide power outages was 25 years ago, and every conversation she overheard seemed to revolve around that sum. I thought they fixed this 25 years ago, someone said. And it may have been 25 years, but I remember it good as yesterday. Or 25 years. Couldn't they have bought Matilda more time than that? These grievances were innocent enough on their own, but to Aster, they were reminders. 25 years her mother had been dead. Talk about a woman with no care for should, said Flick, leaving her baby before it had a first sip of milk. What? Aster replied, aware Flick had spoken, but clueless as to what they said. Thoughts of Loon had increased to the point of distraction, interfering with her work. She gulped her tea, hopeful the bitterness would focus her enough to deal with this cold. Do you have isopropyl alcohol? She asked. Flick scrunched their brow, poked out their plump lips. Great Mima, they called, then louder. Great Mima. A woman appeared after Flick's fifth call. What? She asked, hand clamped around a fabric idol. She'd been praying. Old girl says she needs alcohol, said Flick. The woman, young to be the mother of a mother of a mother, turned to Aster. We don't got nothing pure, Yoa, she said, and it took Aster a minute to parse the particular form of address. Where Aster lived, folks said Yongwa, soft O, then a G sound. It meant Yongwan in the language of the Tarlands. I do got something that might do. One moment, the woman added. Flick read the reign of Night Empress as they waited for their great Mima to return. Aster saw it was the same copy she herself had owned 15 years earlier. The lemon curd she'd spilled on it as a child still smeared the top left corner. There was more on page 11, covering up the tip of Night Empress's rifle. This good? The woman asked as she returned, handing over a jar. Aster unscrewed the lid, flecks of orange rust peeling from the age-softened metal. She gagged upon smelling the contents and slammed the lid back on. Booze, she asked. More or less, said the woman. What you need it for? I suppose if you have a drink, it'll warm you from the inside. I wouldn't recommend it. Couldn't pay me a new pair of shoes to drink that piss. She pinched Aster's cold-nipped ears, but they were too numb, and Aster didn't feel the pressure. It is fuel for the stove I'm going to build. I'll need that can too, said Aster, pointing to the large cylinder in the corner of the cabin labeled Mama Lou's baked beans, brown sugar, maple, bacon, family size, 6 pounds, 5 ounces. I'm gonna stop there for now, if that's okay. So I'm myself running out of reading endurance. Yeah. Oh, thank you so much for listening. Yeah. I will admit it's the first time that I've returned to these pages and actually read this in quite some time. The nature of writing and publishing is that you, even by the time that it's out in the world, the release day, you're over it. You've spent so very much time with it. And then that's the first time that other people are seeing it for the first time and they're so excited, and that can kind of fuel your own excitement back. But I've written other books since then, so it's like, and it's just, it moves on. It's like the world moves on and you're just like, oh, I've got to start talking about this other book and this other book. So it's really, really beautiful to return to this. I like it. I'm Yeah, I'm proud of myself. I'm proud of myself for having written this. And I think the things that I was saying, like, so much in this scene already is about, there's a kind of an attitude of makeshiftness, of doing what you can with the little bits that you have. And there's joy. I think there's joy. That literally, it's an amputation, and Flick has so much humor and so much joy inside of them, and that's so beautiful. And I think it's interesting. Even Aster, I think, like, sometimes I think you could read her as being somewhat sort of, I don't know, oblivious to the social, like, humor happening, but I think that she also has a bit of cleverness to her here as well. And I like that this time for, like, laughing and silliness, even amongst this really painful thing. And I have to think neither Aster nor Flick knows what's going to happen at this stage. This is their life. This is what it is, and there's nothing more. They don't know future. Flick doesn't know her fate, and she can't. None of us can. we get echoes of what things that might happen. We have these blackouts happening that are sort of a past thing coming back. But what happens over the course of a few sort of weeks, basically, their whole lives change. But here right now, they're just in this room together, laughing, while something quite sad is happening. I've been talking a lot about, I don't know, the role of myself as an artist or as a writer in this world. And all of my books, I think every book is a political act. I think writing is inherently a political act, no matter what you're writing. But I think my books are specifically, I don't think them necessarily polemical, but it's like I have my values and I have the world that I live in, and I think about my friends and my family and the lives that we live and what we believe and how we talk. And like, I think that shows up in my books that are really concerned with change and revolution and how do we do all of this. So I would say that my books are very specifically political books and engaging with, the pains of history, with things like disability and gender and race, obviously, and sort of all of the different ways that our bodies are coercively recruited into this terrible social order that none of us actually, like I said, it's coercive. None of us agreed to this. And I always want to take time to, like, I guess, point that out. I think that there's a sense in which we've kind of like ended up in the worst timeline. And there is a world where everybody sitting in this room, we could be somehow not deeply sort of entwined in these like horrible relations of power. But we are. And so what does that mean for me, like as a writer, writing about this? What does it mean to be sort of writing about this? And I think I've always been a quite political person. Not always, I'd say from ages about 8 or 9, when I moved. That's the age that I moved to sort of the North Dallas suburbs. You can probably imagine what the politics of that were like. Very formative, sort of the election of George W. Bush happening, and the sort of the recount and all of that, and all of this sort of awakening happening when I was in 6th grade, so maybe 11 years old, and really starting to see myself as, oh, everyone around me thinks something quite differently than what me and my family believe, and how to make sense of that. So I've always been political in some sense, or like aware of myself as a political subject, and we all sort of in navigating this. But recently, I guess, as someone who I think has achieved quite massive success, I think I can say that. And I am extremely fortunate to be one of the rare writers who I support myself exclusively with my writing. I get paid enough for my books but that's because I have proximity to different powers that make that possible. And always at the end of the day with publishing, it's always going to be about who is allowed to speak and who isn't. And I think I'm allowed to speak. And I think about the ways that, okay, my voice is out there, but what does it do? What has it done? It's 5.5 years, and where are we? And I'm not trying to be a downer, because I will always write, and I love to write. And I think that I feel like we can't, it's a little unfair that we talk about art differently than we talk about all of these necessities of like human life. No one's like, oh, what does it mean politically that I, made myself dinner or something like that? It's like cooking and eating. That's a part of, human life, work, love, and art. These are all just, I think, human necessities. But because I've achieved so much, and it's allowed me sort of be in a different class, and sort of think about the power that I hold. I really want to be thinking about, okay, well, writing, it might change someone, but it's not going to change the world. And I really want to think about what can change the world. And Asta changed the world in her book, right? And not just Asta supported by, Giselle and Theo and her mother, and all of the people sort of unnamed to sort of come together to make this thing happen. And I want to go back to that idea of that they didn't know that that was going to happen. I don't think Asta set out to change the world. I think what she aimed to do was to love and spread love. I think Asta has so much love inside of her, and it's sort of inherent to her healing. And she wanted to think about her mother in the past and reconnect. And in that process of all of that loving, did change the world. Yeah, a lot of this, me speaking, is I always wish that I had more answers than I do. Every book starts as kind of an obsessive question. And I would hope by the end of the book, I arrive at an answer, but really it's always just more questions. But also it's possibilities. And I think that's sort of the main things. Every book, not even just science fiction or fantasy or things that are sort of really extra imaginary, are an act of speculation, right? Of different ways that things could be and things could go. And I speculate, I think many times in this world, we get stuck and limited by the way that things are. And it's really hard to imagine anything outside of the way that things are. I remember a conversation. I'm like politically, I like call myself an anarchist. And I remember I was in this sort of conversation with a friend, and they were like, and I'm also anti-work, and it sucks. I and they're like, oh, if we don't have like jobs that people are forced to do, who's gonna like, who are they gonna, no one's gonna like voluntarily agree to be like a garbage truck driver or something like that. And I was like, it's so bold of you to assume that the only world that we could live in is that we're generating enough like unreusable waste that we need like a whole service of people to like deal with it like that. Like we're so kind of limited in how we think about things. And stories are a way of sort of breaking that open. Like this is not the only way to do this. And even a story like this, where they're living in a sort of authoritarian police state, that sort of all of the worst things that could be, they're still doing some things differently than we do. Like I think that the way that the Thailanders do gender is so obviously different than what we do. And like, I think we have this assumption that like, this is how it is, so this is how it's always was. This is what's natural to human and animal life. And I don't think it is. So I think lately I've come to think of my role as a writer, as one of sort of showing different possibilities. And people can pick up on that or not, when I was little and I wanted to be a writer, the main thing I wanted was to be famous. I also wanted to be an actress and a ballerina, and all of these things, because I guess there was so much in my heart that I wanted to say, and I wanted it to be seen. And now the most important thing to me is to connect with a single person, and their world is, they are touched and their world is a little bit more open. That is all there is. That is all that I can do. That's all any of us can do, really. I mean, we can work, we don't know, we can sort of move towards change, but we don't know where that's going to get us. But we know that we can connect with people and love them, and maybe that will spark something. We can plant a tree. Oh, that's so corny. We can plant a tree together, but we can plant a tree together. We can do all of these things. So yeah, I'd curious if you have questions or thoughts, more of a comment, really. I would like to hear from you, even if it's just to introduce yourself and say hi and like have a conversation. Because I've run out of things to say on my own. I had these notes, people. I maybe addressed one of these points. Did I say rootlessness at some point? Yes. I didn't talk about God as change and parable of the sower, but I was going to say good things about it. Yeah. So any questions, thoughts? Yes. Oh.
Wait,
Oh.
got the microphone so that everyone can hear. And so we're going to start with questions here, then we're going to bounce to Zoom folks. So Zoom folks, get ready.
Why is the ship named Matilda?
That's a great question. The ship is named Matilda because it is named in honor is not the right word, but the last slave ship to bring enslaved people to, the so-called United States was called the Clotilde. And so I wanted a kind of similar type of name to that. A pretty name, but also there's violence in it. Yeah.
So Z's question is, I have some curiosity about some of the world building regarding gender segregation on the Matilda low decks. On Q deck, all kids use she pronouns. Are they all raised as women, or at some point are they split up and certain kids are sent elsewhere? Curious about anything you want to share about this. And that question comes with a lot of love for your writing. All your books are my favorites.
Thank you so much for that question. In my imagining, they're not raised as women. She is a sort of neutral pronoun. I was influenced by the writer Anne Lecky's book Ancillary Justice, who used she as a kind of neutral pronoun, and I was really into that. They are not at all in this world. Bodies are not coercively signed into male and female. There's no sort of distinguishing of assigned sex for those raised in the Tarlands. And some of that was just imagining sort of, like three things. One was just imagining a different world. What would it look like if we didn't do that? We could very well have ended up in a world where people were sort of like separated into, who had widow's peaks and didn't, or something like that. So one, I was just imagining a possibility where that was different. Two, it's sort of referred to in the book, there's an intersex condition that's very common and sort of runs among these people, which makes that sort of way of gendering people as babies very not really that practical. So there's that. And then three, really thinking about sort of pre-colonial sort of gender systems and ways of organizing people. At the time I hadn't, but I've read it now. There's a wonderful, wonderful book called The Invention of Women by a Nigerian scholar who talks about the sort of colonial encounter between Yoruba people and sort of British colonialists and the imposition of gender on them. And while there were ideas of like a sort of separation between these are people who sort of maybe are the people who get pregnant and not, it doesn't sort of logically infect I use the word infect, they're like the rest of culture. That doesn't say anything else about who you are as a person. And it's completely like non-existent in the language itself. You can't even say the word brother or sister. You can only say sibling. And there are sort of different social things which are much more important than gender. So things like age. So you're much more likely to refer to someone or think of someone when you're relating to them, whether they're an elder to you, and so therefore had to pay more respect, or younger than you, and things like that. So influenced by these ideas of different ways of organizing society. I hope that helps.
So this is actually a follow-up to the last thing about Matilda and the Clotilda, and I had thought of that too, but I also thought of the song Waltzing Matilda, where Matilda is a backpack in Australian slang. So
Okay.
that's what you carry with you.
Yeah.
And
I love
so
that.
that worked too. So I thought of the song Waltzing Matilda, where in Australian slang, Matilda is a backpack. So the Matilda is what you carry with you, which works for the ship as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I really like that. And I also really, so something about, sorry, I'm going to just go off here on a little tangent about writing. So I wasn't thinking of that when I wrote this, but I think it's like just as true, because all sort of like language and words is like this kind of material, and I don't know everything that sort of influenced me or influenced my thinking, and it's just as kind of alive on the page. It's like a real world that people can sort of interact with. Yeah, thank you for that. I appreciate it.
Is there Megan and Diane, someone else?
Hello. Hello.
Hey.
Yeah, it is my undying regret that I'm pregnant the year that you come.
No.
But you know, we'll run into each other again. So I just put in the chat that, you know, I don't really have a question, but I just wanted to say, as maybe the foremost River Solomon scholar in the world, I might be, you know, I got some things in the cooker. But anyway, I teach your work every semester at all levels, undergraduate and graduate. And I will continue to do so basically forever. And so I just wanted you to know, like, your work is growing trees everywhere. And we understand and teach the political valences of your work. Probably even beyond some of what you intended. And so I just wanted you to know that, you know, we're out here reading and proselytizing your work. So that's all I have to say.
Thank you so much. And also congratulations on your pregnancy.
Thank you.
And yeah, everyone who I ever write, there's always a piece of me in them, in different aspects. But like, yeah, I would say the characters whose experience of life most reflects mine, it's a mix of Theo and Asta.
Hi. We were talking at our table about Giselle. We have so many feelings about Giselle, and I just wanted to hear you talk about her. Like, we had a lot of thoughts about how she moves in the book and how we feel about her. And I imagine she agitates a lot of feelings in a lot of us, but I'd love to hear like how you see her operating in that world. She makes me ask a lot of bigger questions about what adaptations to ruthlessness a lot of us are making every day, and as she kind of refuses that adaptation. Yeah, so I wonder if you could talk about that.
Yeah, I love Giselle. I think that she's a very difficult character for a lot of people. I think for many, she could be an unlikable character. I was reading, I don't read anything about my work typically, but I had somehow come across someone reviewing Unkindness of Ghosts who was talking about just how much he hated her. And then when he got to the chapter that was sort of from her voice, that he was like, God, and then I had to have a whole chapter. It was just her, and I hate her so much. And I was like, you know what? I understand. She's difficult. I think Giselle is a really sort of a representation of one that a kind of madness isn't always, that madness, there's like possibility in madness, that it can be sort of bravery, seeing things that sort of other people might not see, a sort of unrestrained love and givingness, and all of these things that, yeah, I think a lot when I was writing her, I was thinking about myself and the sort of the way it is to move when then there's no sort of filter between all of the pain inside and what you're feeling and how you act. And I think in a lot of ways, she's a sort of a foil against Asta and characters like Theo, who are very, very restrained and sort of filtered. And there's a big sort of gap between what's inside and what's able to get out. And Giselle doesn't have that at all. And I think that that's really beautiful. I think that I think it's beautiful to be known. I mean, I interpret her so much about her is that she was just deeply, deeply in love with Asta, but that Asta didn't love her back in that same way. And that was devastating to her. And like, it's really just that, sometimes it's just that simple, basic type of thing. And so much of her character revolves around that. So yeah, I hope that's, yeah.
We have time for one more question. I just want to say that this is not the last time that we'll have an opportunity to engage with Rivers. So please write your questions down. There will be a panel this afternoon, and Rivers will be on that panel. Olivia.
Can you hear me okay?
Yeah.
Great. First of all, thank you so much. Your work has been so impactful and important to me. Throughout your books, you're sort of grappling always with this idea of who is raising children, who is doing that work, what does it mean to respect children as autonomous? And so I would love to hear you talk a little bit about how you see the connection between parenting, mothering, and revolution.
Oh man, yeah. Oh, that's a difficult question to end on, just because that's my whole blog. Like, yeah, at first I will say that I'm interested in sort of alternative ways of sort of organizing people, and that sort of, and against the sort of the traditional family structure. One that sort of pulls us away from community and ties to the land and ties to other people, but one that's inherently limits the world of children quite severely. I believe that we live in a world that oppresses children unconscionably, and they have no control, no autonomy, no say in their own lives. And sometimes it has absolutely devastating ends, that for many of us, a child is not someone to be listened to. So yeah, so that's always sort of been my work, and something that I've been thinking about a long time since I was young. And especially when I was a teenager, thinking about how little say that I had in my life. And like, that's something that we kind of say is cliche about like teenagers, oh, but it's like, it's real. It's very real, and it's very hard to live like that. And children have so little power. So yeah, mothering, I do it. It's painful. It's really a lot. I don't think, and there's I think the sort of the most sort of motherly role we have in this is Aunt Melusine. And she's a kind of a character who's been very sort of like coercively put into this like mothering position, who has no wish for it. And I don't know. And I think a lot of times when I wrote her character, I was just trying to be sort of resist the sort of mammy type of figure that we get in a lot of fiction, and with sort of older Black women type of characters. But also it's real. I remember once like sitting with my grandmother in the kitchen. She had 7 kids and also then raised 2 of her grandchildren. I was sitting in the kitchen with her. She was cooking, and she was, I fucking hate cooking. She said that. I was like, really? You cook so good though. Like, and I was like, why? And I was like, because I was like just coming into cooking. I was like, oh, it's so beautiful. It's like, it connecting with, people and love. And she's like, I've been forced to do this for like the past 50 years, and like just thinking about that, like what this sort of like what labor kind of means and the sort of the family structure that we have. So I don't know. I mean, I could just keep talking about this. I will say one thing, and it's something that someone asked about my most recently published book, which is called Sorrowland, but there's a mother character in that. And like, someone asked once, do I think that she's a good mother? And I, and I wanted to say, I actually don't think it's possible to be a good mother in this world, in this society in which this act of child rearing is put so heavily on one person or two people. Like, it's just an impossible task. So yeah. Yeah. Should I like close? Should I like try to say like a deep
That's up to
little?
you. Do you have things to say?
I guess I would like to say one last thing, which is that every night before my 8-year-old goes to sleep, I tell him that I love him so much because there's only one him, and there's only going to be one him ever. Like, there have been billions and billions of people since the beginning of time, and there'll be billions more, but there's only going to be one you with your unique subjectivity. And that's true for me, and that's true of every single person in this room. And just sort of think about that, like what that means, and what you can do and sort of be this with this, sort of one life that we have to live. So yeah.